biggest business on the planet, bigger than music, bigger than Hollywood combined. And mobile accounts for the lion's share of revenues, but ad spend is less stellar. So today, Mobile Explorers, we explore the opportunities in in-game advertising and how everyone can come out a winner. And I can't resist the pun because speaking of winners, pun intended, I'm joined today by my co-host, Greg Wester from Digital Turbine. Greg, great to have you.
Hey, Peggy, how are you?
And that's what we're going to do. Everyone's going to come out a winner. You're here. Great to have you. And what a winning guest, right?
Yeah, well, first, Peggy, we've been doing these for a little bit, and I'm totally excited to be here, but even more excited to be able to introduce, Chris Heatherly. You've been in games for forever. Pixar, Disney, Star Wars, in-games, sold games, monetized games. Really interested in what we kind of kick off here today with you. But, just to really set the hook for our listeners today, your opinion right off the top. Peggy mentioned that there's this difference between time spent and where the advertisers are in investing in it. What's going on there? What do games have to do better? What do advertisers have to rethink and do better? Your bottom line to kick us off.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the podcast. It's an honor. I guess the way I would answer that is I think that we're just going through a huge revolution in media all over the place. Traditional media is being severely disrupted now. I think we're kind of in the last stages of the old media model giving way to the new media model. I mean, what do I think that means for games? I think that in-game advertising, will continue to be a good business. I think that in-game advertising continues to be undervalued by brands because even though it's reaching the majority of people on mobile. Games is one of the largest app categories, probably second only to social media on mobile devices. So in terms of attention and where people are spending time, mobile games is where people are spending their time. I'm hoping that we're going to enter an era where advertisers have to, start to pay more attention to where people are spending their time and put a bigger premium on things like in-game advertising, especially with stuff like rewarded video where, it's opt-in, on behalf of the user. So you watch the ad in order to get a reward. And because it's rewarded, people tend to have higher complete times. They tend to, be more engaged. The other space that I'm in that I think, is growing a lot and will grow more is CTV. I work with a company called Playworks that does games and fast apps for connected television, so smart TVs. And that space has been on fire because, it's literally in the, hundreds of millions of devices now that are out there, but still kind of underdeveloped as a market. So I think we're going to see a large programmatic ad opportunity as those fast apps kind of take over from traditional cable. And then also as, more interactive formats start to become common on CTV, things that are games and game-like.
So if I were to bottom line that, you're saying shift is inevitable, shift is coming, and we just need to work through the mechanics of the industry, but we'll get there.
Yeah, I think that, and I also think that there's a definite overvaluation of traditional media still. I think that just kind of where we are in the, in the life cycle of these things, that estimation has to flip. That brand marketers, if they want to reach people under 40, they're going to have to do it through digital and, figure out that environment.
Again, I know one of the things we wanted to talk about on this was attention, right? And Chris, you mentioned TV is still the bellwether for brand, but that's also where you see a tremendous amount of the new attention metric companies kind of validating that traditional media does actually deliver those attention dollars. But those same companies show that, to your point, attention really is held within the game. And I'd love to get your perspective on how games have cultivated that by being one of the few media types that are really crafted so that the ad comes at a time when the consumer is willing to actually engage at that break time between levels.
So there's a trend in games called hyper-casual, which is a genre of games that really have been designed from the ground up to drive advertising. I would say in the early days of in-game advertising that it was mostly an afterthought, and so ad placements were kind of awkwardly inserted in kind of a retrofit way into the game. Now you have developers who are designing their game specifically around ad engagement. And the real big innovation in the space that has driven that is this concept of rewarded video advertising, which is the notion that instead of interstitials, which is or banners, which are kind of intrusive formats that interrupt your experience, that the most powerful way to do advertising in a game is to gamify it, and by giving people rewards for watching the ads. And so people have a option to not watch the ads. In a lot of these games, they can pay to turn off ads, but they still have rewarded video opportunities, meaning they may not get interstitials or banners or what have you anymore, but they still can do rewarded video. And it's a very popular format, and it's grown significantly and has become very common in mobile gaming. You're going to see a lot of brands move to this kind of rewarded behavior.
What you're saying, Chris, is balance what consumers want and balance what advertisers want. And advertisers want that high level awareness, that storytelling that's brought in by video. But ultimately, to your point and your example, they want to drive it down the funnel and get that call to action. And so the thing that's unique about games is this idea of a mind with momentum tends to keep that momentum. So if I have been playing with the game and poking and pushing buttons and engaging, and you show me something that's interesting with the same production quality of the game that I'm playing, I'm very, very likely to continue to engage. The other thing that came to mind when you were talking about rewarded video is this balance of consumers' desires for advertising and advertisers' desires for advertising. And there are a handful of formats that actually do both. And those are the formats that at Digital Turbine we call the cooperative ad formats. And those same formats, when you look at studies from Lumen or from Adelaide or from Amplified Intelligence or all the attention vendors, those are actually all of them. Cinema, cooperative, I'm sitting in a seat, nothing else to do. TV, crafted, high-quality ads when my mind is turned off. Rewarded video inside of games. They share the characteristic of working for the advertiser, working for the consumer, and at that moment, you get that nirvana state where people tend to absorb, recall, engage, and drive advertiser results.
Increasingly, this concept of rewarded advertising that leads to rewards, or brands driving loyalty, is going to be a huge trend. And the thing about rewards that I've realized is that when you psychologically, when you feel like you've earned something, it's so much more valuable to you than something that you were just given, because you actually had to do something in order to get it. And so, increasingly in games, we're kind of seeing things shift even from, rewarded video to rewarded activities where I have to actually win the game, achieve something, or be in a guild or some, other activity. And this is the thing that I think NFTs and Web3 will ultimately do, is that if you imagine kind of the whole flow, you'll be able to, do things either in app or in the real world. You click on a QR code, it takes you to a site, you get something like an NFT in your wallet, and then that advertiser or other brands you interact with will be able to look at the digital things that you've accumulated, and then they be able to personalize their experience, their offers, and everything else to you. Where as you proceed down the funnel, it's about being a member of a club, and it's about attaining benefits within that club based on your loyalty and your engagement. And it starts to feel less like a marketing relationship, and more like a concierge relationship. But ultimately, I think brands that are thinking about community engagement, community building, and how to reward loyalty are going to be the ones that are going to win.
There's a little bit of a sort of like a stop in the middle of all of that, if you think about it, Greg, because we're talking about the attention metric here and also my involvement. I have invested. So if I'm very interested in getting that reward, and even better if it's not just necessarily clicking a button, but the placement of the ad makes sense. So the game publisher has done better. The ad is better. The ad is more appealing. There's something in there that's going to say that in the middle of this, until we get to that disruptive end that is so cool where it all comes together, is that advertisers and game publishers are going to come closer together to make this rewarded experience very motivating.
The key is going to be around continuing the evolution of making those ad placements feel natural and beneficial, So, an example that comes to mind for me is like in the Web3 space, Coca-Cola has been very active. And they've done, a variety of different NFT activities that I would say have been good for their brand. And so increasingly the brands want to be there, right? And those experiences are not about advertising in the traditional sense. They're about engagement and then trying to create an authentic. I advise the biggest developer publisher of branded content on Roblox, which is a company called GameFam. And, they work with, Paramount and NBC Universal and a variety of big toy brands. But, we also have worked with people like, Build-A-Bear, right? And, when we do those types of engagements or when they do those types of engagements, the question is, okay, if I build a play-based experience around your brand, what should that play be? Like, what does the audience want to do? You're not experiencing an ad per se. What you're experiencing is a game. It's a real game, and it's got to be a good game, by the way. The idea that you can make a crappy marketing game and people will engage in it, it turns out is not an effective use of spin. It has to be good. It has to be fun because it's still a game. It's got to play like a game, right? If it doesn't play like a game and if it's not a good game on its own right, then there's no point in engaging in it. I think this notion of, building authentic play-based experiences is going to be key for people who want to be successful in those environments.
It's interesting because our philosophy here at Digital Turbine is very, very similar. We don't actually design and build standalone games, but a core differentiation of our technology is the ability to add in-video interactivity and post-video interactivity. And within those different forms of interactivity is gameplay, challenge levels, achievements that can be built into what traditionally would have been called a programmatic ad placement, but that experiential component can be built in with technology to give a very portable play experience as part of and in between gameplay. And, it drives, doubles up attention numbers and that play, as you know, is what's going to drive that brand enforcement, brand equity understanding, brand intent, all of the things that an advertiser wants.
I think that a lot of ad integration type things miss is that they think that interactivity is the point. So they, the logic that they buy into is sort of like younger people want things that are interactive. So let's make something interactive. You can't just make any old thing that's interactive and expect it to perform. It's got to be, the way I would think about it is if you're going to do something interactive, how is that driving in the direction of empowering that person to do something that helps you build the brand further? So, it's really about how do we turn our audience and our fans into our marketers, right? Into our marketing team. And so you have to think about things like, when you think about like the activity that I'm doing, like how am I adding value as a viewer, right, at home? Is there something I can do to add value back to the brand or further the brand? And then what's the reward for that and how does that reward kind of continue the cycle? Authenticity is hard to prove, right? Which is why it's so coveted. So, when you can do things like NFTs that are, can't be copied easily, and can be verified, you're driving people to something that can create social proof, because it's like, well, you have that thing. I can prove that thing you have is authentic. And so therefore, it has some value to you. And so I think increasingly, like, what people need to think about is not the interactivity itself, is not the magic. It's how do I use interactivity to provide a game term that we use as agency. So how do I give agency to the player or the viewer to do something, to take action, right? It's not just the call to action, but it's the actual means of action that I'm providing you. How do I make that a fun experience and then allow you to kind of take the next step, not just going further down in the funnel, but increasingly marketing then to your friends, right?
Let's talk a little bit more about that experience, because the attention in games is really off the chart. That's what the data says. I'm wondering what you say about this, because you're working with games, Chris, but you're also working with brands, and they both want this attention, and that's where they get it. And that's where they can build it.
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing about games is that they're custom crafted experiences to drive a certain play experience. And so it's a focused activity, that, is somewhat curated. And also it's lean forward, right? If you're playing a game, like, even if it's on your phone and you're sitting on the couch, like, you've got your hands on the screen, you're not sitting back and just watching. That makes for a much more kind of attentive, focused user. There's a tipping point there where you can overexpose your user to advertising and kind of interruptive things, and where it starts to feel overly aggressive. But that point, the balance point is it is probably more aggressive than you think. Or some of these successful hyper casual games, they're showing ads every 30 seconds, every minute, much higher frequency. And part of the way they're able to get higher frequency, right, is through rewarded video, because, people are able to, opt in to watch more ads than normally could on, whatever the interstitial clock is. These games can have, millions of daily active users, playing, a good game will have probably 4 or 5 sessions or more a day. Those sessions, could be as short as 5 minutes, or they could be anything kind of north of like 30 minutes of playtime a day is a pretty good number. So, that's kind of the engagement of a mobile app. But some of these games can have hours of engagement a day. Yeah. And then within those, those games, you can just kind of do the math on what the ad impressions would be if you think you're showing an ad roughly once a minute.
And it's wild how frequently, because you just said it yourself, you're thinking about CTV or linear, that's not even close.
It's the fact that it is an interactive format and you're able to opt in. If you press the show me the ad because I want the thing button, you can't blame, anyone but yourself for pressing that button, right? Now, eventually you might say, I have to press that button too much. I don't want to play this game, but when you're opting in, you tend to be less annoyed by the advertising because you chose when and how you wanted to do it. I mean, when I play these games, there are times where I'm like, you know what? I've watched 3 ads in a row. I don't want to watch another ad. I've had enough. I'm just going to keep playing without watching the ad. Or, I'll leave and I'll come back later. And both of those are, perfectly okay answers, but because I'm able to manage my ad load, I'm willing to consume more advertising, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so super interesting, Chris. And as I mentioned before, at Digital Turbine, we study attention numbers and work with multiple attention vendors. And let me just kind of toss out a few numbers. So rewarded video as verified by multiple attention vendors for a 30-second spot maintains attention for north of 20 seconds. And if you compare that to kind of scrolling through and the in-stream, in-feed ads, where certainly an advertiser has already made compromises to making their ads shorter. You look at the attention level and you wind up with sub 2 seconds, right? So you've already shortened your video. It's in fact, I was looking with a coworker at a couple of user guides for some in-feed video the other day, and they listed the pros and cons. The cons for the in-feed video was your ad is going to have to compete with the content that it is adjacent to, which right off the bat, dictates and states very clearly the challenge that advertisers have in gaining attention when the publisher itself says you're going to have a problem stopping the user from continuing on. And that's quantified in the numbers from multiple attention vendors.
I think that learning from mobile app advertisers can be applied. Those formats can be used for anything, right? That interactivity could be anything you can imagine. So, but that notion that I have to, there's a reward for me in the game in order to get the thing, I need to watch the ad. People will stay the end in order to get it. And if you can make that ad spot engaging and entertaining enough, I'm not going to, gild the lily and say that all in-game advertising is wonderful. Like a lot of it's crap, but, the well done ads, I find myself forgetting about the game I'm playing and getting kind of like, distracted by the ad in the game and wanting to get the thing, respond to the advertising. So I think that as, ad makers get better at interactive, and interactive placements, they'll be more successful at driving engagement and kind of, click through and everything else through those types of formats. But that rewarded concept again is extremely powerful.
You're working with brands, so you're hearing what they're telling you as well. And it's part maybe of what you're saying when you're talking out there about what game companies need to do. You're saying, no, they need to be more like entertainment companies. And maybe brands, well, they need to create interactive experiences in the game.
I think brands need to be content companies, really, in terms of the way that they operate. Because so much of brand engagement is going to be around engaging people in and around digital. And, increasingly, these are not going to look like linear formats. They're going to be interactive formats, and they're going to be connected to one another. The game that I play in Roblox will somehow, be connected to, the stuff that I'm doing on TikTok, will be connected to the stuff that I'm doing on, Twitch or what have you. And, those are a complete, kind of user journey, right? Because games increasingly are not just about the game itself. They get streamed and watched by, millions of people. And people form communities around them, and those communities have value. And, those communities increasingly are going to live in, in these different game formats and in the metaverse. Brands are going to need to think about how they build and manage community kind of in the digital ecosystem in general. And then how do you create content, that is, contextually relevant, that, keeps your brand in the conversation, right? And I think that's a lot of what I would advise, brands to be thinking about is, not all brands are going to make a good game, but there may be a good integration into a game. I think a lot of these activities get seen kind of as like, oh, we'll have the special projects group or the digital group or whatever do these things. But increasingly, this is going to be the heart of what you do as a brand, right? Is figure out how to engage in these different spaces, especially as we kind of shift away from the game as an app era into the game as content era. And I know that's something that you wanted me to talk about, Peggy, but what I mean by games as content is in the world of Roblox or Fortnite or some of these other things, increasingly it's not building standalone games. It's about making game experiences within these already established huge gaming communities, these metaverses, and creating engagement within those things. And so increasingly, I think these brand teams are going to have to think about, not just kind of events and stunts, but kind of what a continuing presence in some of these metaverse spaces, means.
So actually, we could have another show just talking about what it's going to be like when games are content companies, but won't do it now. We're going to wrap it up here, Chris, and have a little bit of fun because, hey, we've got you on the show and you're amazing. You do a lot. You're in the industry. You got your own podcast as well. You're on our podcast. You have your own.
I do. So my podcast is called Plus One. It's relatively new. You can find it on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for now. You can also follow me on LinkedIn. I post a lot of stuff there about the games industry and brands, Hollywood kind of spaces that I know about. But Plus One, I'm trying to do conversations with one person at a time. I know a lot of cool people from all my years doing various different things. I've been blessed to be, in the design industry, the games industry, the toy industry, the tech industry, and a lot of other spaces. So I know a lot of just really interesting people. These are people that are not always on podcasts. They're not always the usual suspects. So, and the other thing is that because I'm a practitioner, I'm a game builder, I'm an executive that's actually run these businesses. I have a lot of hands-on knowledge that a lot of people who are like the usual, podcast interviewers don't necessarily have. I'm trying to have these podcasts be, really conversational, pick a single topic with a single person and dive in and really get, provide meat on the bone, not just kind of the surface level stuff you hear everywhere else. So that's what I'm trying to do.
I think you're doing a great job. That's why we got you here, Chris. So we did a little shameless plug for your podcast, but let's talk a little bit about your lessons, your thinking for the industry. Have a little fun here. A movie title, a song title, a lyric that comes to mind when you're thinking about brand advertising and mobile games and why.
Armageddon. I mean, it's a mess, right? It's a mess right now. It's a mess, but that's, I always say change creates opportunity, right? And so when traditional models, I've made my whole career off of disruptive technology. And while one can always be too early to these things, I think that we are in a moment of systemic, radical change on a lot of fronts. And, my advice to anyone is, look past the current disruption and look past what has been and look to where things are going to be. And if you start to move in that direction, you're going to be better off than if you spend your time trying to defend or kind of optimize the current moment, because the pace of change is accelerating and it's not going to stop.
If I had to answer that question, Peggy, my song title would be an ABBA favorite, Take a Chance on Me. Got to stop looking in the rearview mirror, start headed towards the future. Just sign the order, sign the IO.
There you go.
I like that better. I like that better. I'm going to plus one your thing there, Greg.
Yep.
All right. Well, Chris, awesome chatting with you.
You too. Great to talk to you guys. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in, fellow explorers. Want to be featured on our next show so you can brag about your successes? Then just click the link below, answer 3 quick questions, and you might find yourself smack dab in the special guest seat on our next show. And thanks again to our sponsor, The Brag Report from Digital Turbine and Apptopia. Mobile Explorers is sponsored by The Brag Report, the industry source of brand-centric insights for a mobile-centric world. Handcrafted by the mobile gurus over at Digital Turbine and Apptopia.